Welcome to Artisphere, presented by TD Bank, the virtual experience. I'm Traci Wright Martin, and this art lab demonstration is sponsored by First National Bank. Okay, we're going to be talking about charcoal drawing, and this is an example of a drawing. We're using the grid system. This system is a really popular tool. It's wonderful for getting getting a likeness, working with proportions. Usually we work from a picture, like you can print a picture, something that kind of goes where you can refer to one square at a time for kind of getting your initial drawing. And this is sort of a light pencil sketch that shows you kind of the beginning stages of what the drawing is going to look like, using just graphite on the paper, a very light gridded pencil line here. We're using a ruler. And you can see generally just kind of a loose sketch kind of going in to start it out. And basically we're just focusing on getting just a general outline. We're kind of creating a map of where the charcoal is going to go. It's essentially just a simple drawing that we can then go over with the charcoal to kind of tighten up and create our finished work. So I'm going to switch over to the charcoal. We're going to start with one that's in progress already, that you can get an idea of what we're going to do moving on from the original graphite. Okay, so starting the charcoal process, this one's kind of got a bit of the mark making started here. We're going to just be looking back and forth closely at our photograph, and we're going to start to block in a lot of the area where we're seeing kind of the shadows emerge. Now, everything we're looking at here, we want to kind of look at less of lines and more of like the edges of the shadow. So when we create a line, we want to make sure, especially when we're kind of committing to it with the charcoal pencil, that we have an indication of where that shadow is going to go. It's like we're creating the boundary. And so each of these lines is just sort of the edge of the shape. We're kind of just putting in sort of the dominant shapes, making sure they don't get lost in the mixing when we start to blend our charcoal out. There's a whole mess of tools that are really great to have on hand, but you can really do just about any charcoal work with a stick of charcoal, one of these here, a charcoal pencil, and any kind of an eraser. There's quite a bit you can do with just those three things. When you start to kind of get a good foundation going and you start to get an idea of a lot of where your shadow shapes are going to be, then you can kind of start the blending process. We have a couple options here. This is a chamois, and it's kind of been what I would call seasoned with charcoal. There's the more you use it, it kind of gets this great little toned kind of ability to kind of basically sort of smooth the charcoal and kind of apply it and sort of help take some of it off as you're going along. These are called tortillons, and they're all different sizes they come in. And these are basically rolled up, blended paper stumps, and you can use them. You can clean them and sharpen them using a little bit of sandpaper, which is kind of great. So you can always keep a nice tight control over what you're going to do when you go to blend. And so any of the existing places where there is charcoal, it now becomes almost like a little paint palette where you can sort of dip into the charcoal and begin to move it around. So basically we're going from these areas where we've created lines and we've created these nice little boundaries of charcoal, and then we're kind of filling them in and we're blending them out, and we're creating depth, which is something that happens almost immediately when you begin to blend, and it's really kind of a fun process to see it emerge. So basically a lot of this stage is just starting the beginning blending. You're using this not only as a blending tool, but it is its own drawing tool as well. So once you start to get charcoal kind of loaded onto it, then you start to see how it becomes kind of a mid-range, like a middle value. And when we're talking about values, we're talking about lights and darks. And you see those kind of coming together, and you come through as you're beginning to blend. And the places where you've drawn like the most intense marks are the places you want to stay a nice dark black, kind of the high end of your contrast and your value scale. And you can switch over with all these little tiny ones. It's really great for when you go in and you start blending details around the eyes. You can create that value next to the eye. You have a little more control over a finer tipped tool like this, especially when you go into like the end of the beak rather than worrying about staying out of the line or getting out of the lines. You really have a lot more control this way. And you can see very quickly how something that has a 3D dimension to it almost immediately goes really quickly from being flat to having sort of this space. And really a lot of what you're doing in the charcoal stage, I like to kind of call it, you're like sculpting. It's really kind of a sculpting experience in a two-dimensional way. So once you've kind of got some of these areas, and if some of them are starting to look a little bit flat, and you know this whole section of the bird is gonna, you wanna have that roundness of the front of the bird, you know, round this way and round this way. So what you do is you kind of come in, you can come in with the eraser and start to pull back out. And this kind of goes into that same theory of like essentially kind of a sculpting. You're sculpting out a shape and you're pulling some of the charcoal back out. And a lot of what you do when you're starting to find these shapes and kind of build this roundness to the bird, you're basically just kind of, let's see here, yeah, you're kind of creating that 3D space that you want. You want that realism. And it's a push and a pull. There's a little bit added, and then you want to go back and add some more. And using the charcoal stick, this is, you know, you can see where the charcoal pencil only gets just dark enough. So you want to sometimes come back in and really kind of punch up the dark areas with the charcoal stick. And this is also something that you can do using your fingertip as a great blending tool as well. It becomes one of my favorite things to draw with and blend with. And then you can add some of the charcoal dust with your finger if you need to redarken certain areas. So basically we're just creating this whole section here. We're working with the middle ranges. We're getting all of these different areas kind of blocked in. And it slowly starts to take shape. And you can see that kind of, some of the stages are beginning to emerge. You're sort of getting an idea of the beginning stages of making it look lifelike and having roundness. It's basically taking this two-dimensional paper and charcoal and pencil set and creating the illusion of a three-dimensional object. I think that's one of the more fun things about charcoal is that challenge. And when you start to see it emerge, it's really, really fun. And it's important when you're doing the mark making that you're, especially with something like feathers, or if you're drawing another animal with fur or the hair of a human, you know, any kind of directional mark making is important because these wings, these sections of the wing are all going this direction. And when you go to blend them after you've drawn them, it can be easier, even blending with your finger, if you can take it and drag it and just kind of make that all sort of blend together. If you were to blend side to side, you would lose a lot of those lines that you're making. So it's important to think about that. So now you've kind of seen some of the charcoal process come together. I want to show you a little bit about how I like to finish the drawings. And at this point, we've got kind of a fairly good sort of shape going on. Kind of you get the general idea. All of your shadows are kind of in place. You kind of double checking it with the photo you're working from, making sure everything's kind of there. And then I like to bring in, you know, not only often the tiny little eraser pen that can kind of help you get some of these details that I've been working with, but the white charcoal stick pencil, or they also come in these little like little bar shapes that you can kind of work around if you want something with a bigger mark. But coming back in here, you can kind of really add that last layer of detail, kind of bringing out the lights against the darks. It really pops when you have that little white mark next to it. It really kind of lifts it and gets you that last layer of detail that you really need to kind of get that realism that we're going for. And pay attention to little shadows, like there's a little shadows and highlights both in the feet as we're finishing up, and we can come in with another pencil and kind of tighten up and making sure we have all of the shapes in place. Everything is reading realistic. We're not missing any shadows. And the white charcoal is really good for helping us with that. You get the little gleam in the eye, that little sparkle. You can kind of bring in any reflections and kind of making sure that you're achieving the texture you want to, and letting something read, you know, with something that has a shine, like the leg of the bird and the eye. And then you're also coming in and you're making marks that are consistent with the wings of the bird and the feathers. You can find yourself just sort of highlighting little bits of lines, and it really makes that come together. And then it's just a matter of kind of tightening up those details. And then you really have like more of a finished quality at that point. So if you're wanting to try this process, thinking about starting the grid, essentially I work a lot from a grid image that I have put together in Photoshop, and I work from an iPad. You can easily work from a magazine photo that's been hand gridded with like an ink pen. You can work from anything, whatever your comfort level is. And then all you need to do is make sure, if you're gridding a picture that's a 5x7, you need to just make sure, I like to use inch blocks because it gives you just enough space in between without being too detailed with the grid making. And you just want to go ahead and measure out using a ruler, get all your sides together, and then just lightly, it's important that you do it lightly so that you can erase it easily, but then you use just a light graphite pencil and apply the grid and just make sure your grid references match the picture that you're getting ready to draw. And then you just go from there. Thank you for joining me. For more information about my work, you can find me on Instagram at Traci Martin Studios and at my website at www.tracimartinstudios.com. Thanks again to our sponsor, First National Bank. Please enjoy the rest of your visit at Artisphere, presented by TD Bank, the virtual experience.